In this presentation, we're going to be talking about the different forms of referencing the ideas and works of others. As with all the academic skills that we talk about, it's always important to stop and think why you're doing something. Why do you take notes in a particular way? Why do you read in a particular way? And again, with referencing, why are you referencing somebody else's work at all? Well, as we talked about in the plagiarism presentation, it's really important that we build our ideas and our arguments upon the work of others. But do you always need to cite them directly? Could you paraphrase or could you summarize what they've written? Are you including them because they support your argument, or are you challenging their argument? What's the reason for including them in your work? What we mustn't do is get into the habit of just stitching together the arguments of other people to form our own argument. It has to contribute in some way to the argument that you are making. So don't just use them as padding. Don't use them instead of your own voice, your own opinions. Make sure they're there for a particular reason. Now, of course, there are some things we don't need to reference, things that are common knowledge, that London is the capital of England. That's fine. We don't need to cite it. We don't need to get a map out and to prove that. But in the majority of cases, we'll be using other people's research. We'll be using their data. We'll be using their words and their ideas. And so there are a number of different ways that we can reference those ideas and point to the fact that somebody else came up with them first. We didn't come up with them. They might be useful in supporting our argument, but they're not ours. So you might report. You might report very specifically that a particular author argued a particular point. In that case, you just need to make sure that you've got some bibliographic reference in there. Can somebody else follow that up and find it in that book or in that journal article? Or can they find that data set somewhere else? That's something quite specific. You're not using their exact words, but you're reporting what they've said. The next one is paraphrasing. Now, this is where people often get quite confused. This is restating what somebody else has said in your own words. And it's not just changing the odd word here and there from a particular citation. It's having read something and then being able to describe it to somebody else. So think about telling a friend or a family member about what that book is about, what that person's argument is. Can you put it into your own words? And then finally, there are times when we can't put stuff into our own words, and that's really important. Sometimes people have come up with a particular term, they use a particular phrase, and you want to use that in your own work. And this is what we talk when we're directly quoting someone, when we cite them. So in referencing, it's really important to remember that every department at Cambridge has its own style of referencing. There are hundreds of different referencing styles out there. There are some that are more popular than others. You might have heard of Harvard or Chicago, Vancouver, MLA, APA, lots of different ones out there. So become familiar with what the referencing style is in your department. Now, just putting a comma in the wrong place isn't going to lead to plagiarism. But it is really important that we get to grips with what needs referencing, and when we do need to reference it, that we reference it properly so that somebody else can track down that citation. In most cases, when you're referencing something, there'll be an in-text citation or a footnote, and then something at the end as well. There'll be a list of references. Now, this might be just things that you've cited in your essay, or it might be a list of sources that you've consulted to formulate your argument as well as those directly cited. If you're not quite sure how to reference and you haven't got clear guidance from your department, there's some really good resources out there such as Cite Them Right or Zotero Bib, and these you can input the author and the title and it will help you structure them in a way that is appropriate for your referencing style. So here are a few examples of the sorts of information that we need to collect when making notes. And this is really important at the point of making those notes so that you don't have to go back and do it later on. It's just a waste of time. So make sure you're recording for a book, the author, the date, the title, the place of publication, and the publisher. Now, different referencing styles might require you to put this information in a different order. The punctuation might be slightly different. The emphasis, the italicization might be slightly different, but you will need all these bits of information. For an online book, sometimes it's enough to record it in the same way you would a printed book, but to put online in square brackets. Other times you might need a DOI, you might need the date accessed, and that's simply because some of that publication data isn't available in an online format. Do remember, if you're just referring to a particular chapter that has a different author to the editor of the book that you're reading, that you need to record that information as well. So you need the author of the chapter, you'll need the editors, the title, the place of publication, and then the pages, the range of pages that that particular chapter falls at. Now, of course, there are lots and lots of different things that you might cite in your essay. We're just looking at the most popular ones here. So also we've got an example for a journal article and also for a website. And with that, it's really important that you record the date accessed, because as we know, information on the web changes all the time. And that will explain to the person looking at your work why the information online might be slightly different to the information when they follow up a particular URL. But do go online to some of these other software, such as Cite Them Right, and here you'll see examples for all sorts of citations, if it's images, if it's music, if it's social media posts, videos, all these sorts of different types of data that are out there. Now, for some of the work, perhaps at the start of your course, it might be enough just to keep your citations in your notes and you'll be able to keep on top of that. But as you produce longer pieces of work, particularly if you're writing a dissertation or if you're working on your PhD thesis, it's really important that you keep tracks of what you've read, that your notes are kept in an orderly fashion, that you can easily retrieve citations when you need them. So there's lots of software out there that will enable you to do this, and it's great because not only do you keep the bibliographic data, but you can start to make connections between the work. You can group things into folders, which is going to help you in terms of planning your written work. The two pieces of free software that we support at Wolfson Library are Zotero and Mendeley, and we've got lots of videos on our Managing References tab as to how to get started with those. You'll also find that EndNote is supported through the university, but this is linked to the university so that when you leave, you won't be able to take that database with you. The great thing about these is that they generate in-text citations or footnotes, and they work with thousands of different referencing styles, which you can change at the click of a button. So if you had a chapter from your thesis that you also wanted to submit to a journal, you could easily change the referencing style. So they generate those in-text citations. They also generate bibliographies as well, based on what you cited in the text. And this is great so that if you add in a few extra things, they will update. If you delete a paragraph with a few references that aren't cited elsewhere, they will disappear from your bibliography. That's a huge time saver at the end. You want to be able to focus on the content, not on whether or not you've got all the right citations in and whether or not they're formatted properly. So do explore these different sources of support and get in touch if you've got any questions.